There are certain nights when the human heart becomes very quiet, not because love has disappeared, but because it is waiting in silence, hoping not to be wrongly understood. And if these words somehow found you today, maybe a part of your soul is already tired from pretending you no longer care, while another part still secretly hopes someone somewhere is holding on to you just as strongly. Because the truth is, someone loves you more deeply than you realize. Not in the loud, dramatic way movies often show love, not through perfect timing or flawless words, but through hesitation, through emotional confusion, through distance that hides fear instead of a lack of interest. And before you convince yourself to walk away forever, you need to understand something most people discover too late. Some hearts do not stop loving you when they become silent. Sometimes silence is simply the last defense of a soul afraid of losing what it cannot fully express. Human beings are strange when it comes to love, especially when love becomes real. We spend our entire lives believing we want deep emotional connection, yet the moment someone truly touches the hidden parts of us, fear begins to awaken. Carl Jung once spoke about the unconscious mind like a hidden ocean beneath human behavior. And when someone genuinely loves you, they do not merely touch your surface personality, they accidentally awaken the abandoned pieces buried deep underneath it. If this message about silent love touched your heart, hit like so others can see it too. Your insecurities, your unmet needs, your loneliness, your longing to finally be chosen without conditions, that kind of connection changes people. It shakes them internally. It exposes emotional wounds they spent years hiding from themselves. This is why someone can deeply love you and still pull away at the exact moment you need reassurance the most. It feels contradictory, but psychologically it makes a kind of sense. Love is not only warmth. Love is exposure. Love is vulnerability, standing in front of another person hoping they will not use your tenderness against you. And many people were never taught how to survive emotional intimacy. They learned how to survive disappointment. They learned how to appear strong. They learned how to suppress emotions, but they never learned how to safely receive love without fear. So when this person became emotionally attached to you, something inside them began changing in ways they could not fully explain. Your presence started affecting their emotional state. Your silence suddenly mattered. Your attention became something they relied on to feel steady. Your absence became heavier than they expected, and that scared them. Because once someone gains the power to affect your inner world emotionally, part of you immediately recognizes the risk in that. Suddenly losing them becomes possible. Suddenly, abandonment feels imaginable again. Suddenly, your carefully protected independence no longer feels quite as safe. Many people confuse emotional distance with a lack of love, but often emotional distance is actually evidence of emotional overwhelm. There are people who become cold because they do not care, and there are others who become distant because they care too much. The second type is much harder to understand because their behavior contradicts their emotions. Their heart moves toward you while their fear pulls them away. One part of them wants closeness. Another part whispers, "What if this ends the way everything else ended?" And without realizing it, they begin protecting themselves from pain that has not even happened yet. Maybe you have already felt this contradiction yourself, the strange inconsistency, the emotional warmth followed by silence, the way they look at you when they think you are not paying attention, the way they remember small things about you without effort, the emotional tension that exists even in ordinary conversations. And yet something still feels blocked, something unfinished. It is almost as if their heart keeps leaning toward you while their mind keeps stepping backward. This is what unresolved emotional wounds often look like. People imagine emotional wounds as dramatic and obvious, but most emotional wounds are quieter than that. They hide inside attachment patterns, inside fear of vulnerability, inside emotional withdrawal. Some people disappear emotionally the moment they start caring deeply because closeness unconsciously reminds them of pain they never healed from. Perhaps they once loved someone who left them. Perhaps they learned as children that emotional expression led to rejection. Perhaps vulnerability once embarrassed them so deeply that now their nervous system treats intimacy as danger. And the difficult part is this: they may not even consciously understand why they are acting this way. The subconscious mind shapes far more behavior than people realize. Comment "still waiting" if you're holding on to someone who went quiet, but you feel they still love you. A person can genuinely love you while simultaneously undermining the connection because internally their nervous system associates love with emotional risk. They want closeness, but closeness activates fear. They crave intimacy, but intimacy awakens vulnerability. So they begin sending mixed signals without even understanding themselves. This is why emotionally mature love requires patience far more than passion. Passion is easy. Anyone can desire someone intensely for a moment, but true love asks something much harder of people. It asks them to remove emotional armor piece by piece. It asks them to trust again after disappointment. It asks them to remain emotionally open despite uncertainty, and for many people that process feels frightening because they have spent years building identities around emotional self-protection. You must also understand something important about silence. Silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes silence is emotional processing happening beneath the surface. Some people speak their emotions immediately. Others withdraw inwardly when emotions become too strong. They retreat into thought, into confusion, into internal conflict, especially people who have spent their lives suppressing vulnerability. Their silence is not always punishment. Sometimes it is emotional survival. But this creates painful misunderstandings in relationships. One person interprets silence as rejection, while the other experiences silence as protection. One feels abandoned, while the other feels emotionally overwhelmed. And slowly, two people who deeply care for each other begin drifting apart, not because love disappeared, but because fear became louder than communication. This is where many people give up too early. They mistake emotional complexity for emotional absence. They assume love should always look obvious, consistent, and easy. But psychologically meaningful connections are rarely simple. They activate the deepest layers of a person's identity. They force people to confront their hidden selves, the insecure, wounded, frightened parts hidden beneath confidence and pride. Carl Jung believed that real love often becomes a mirror, not just a source of comfort, but a reflection of the unresolved self. And this is why certain connections feel intense in a way that goes beyond the ordinary. They force emotional awakening. They reveal patterns you never noticed before. They expose your fear of abandonment, your tendency to overgive, your fear of being unworthy, your desperate need for reassurance, your hidden loneliness. Suddenly, another person unknowingly becomes connected to parts of your identity you did not realize was still wounded. This person may be experiencing the exact same internal turmoil right now. They may lie awake at night, replaying conversations with you while pretending during the day that everything is normal. Type yes if you want more of the hidden psychology behind why they pull away. They may fight the urge to message you because emotional pride keeps interfering. They may miss you deeply while convincing themselves distance is necessary. And perhaps the saddest part of human psychology is this. People often hurt the ones they love most because those are the only people capable of truly hurting them back. That realization changes everything when you begin seeing people through a psychological lens instead of a purely emotional one, because suddenly you stop interpreting every confusing behavior as a lack of love. You begin recognizing emotional defense mechanisms hidden beneath actions, the delayed replies, the emotional inconsistency, the moments of withdrawal after intimacy, the fear hidden inside emotional restraint. None of these behaviors are healthy when left unresolved, but they are deeply human. And maybe this is the difficult truth your soul needed to hear today. Not every emotionally distant person is emotionally empty. Some are simply emotionally exhausted from surviving life with a guarded heart. There are people walking around carrying years of silent grief nobody ever noticed. People who learn to appear emotionally independent because depending on others once let them down badly. People who secretly crave tenderness but panic the moment they receive it consistently. People who have forgotten how to trust calm love because chaos became familiar to them. If this person truly loves you, their internal battle may be much deeper than you can currently see. But there is another side to this truth that you must not ignore. Love alone is not enough without emotional growth. You cannot save someone from their own unconscious patterns if they refuse to confront themselves. You cannot endlessly sacrifice your emotional well-being hoping your love will heal another person's fear. Real connection requires shared emotional responsibility. Compassion matters deeply and genuinely, but so does self-respect. Understanding the wounds another person carries should never require you to abandon your own emotional needs entirely in the process. This is precisely where emotional maturity becomes not just helpful, but absolutely essential to how you move through any meaningful connection. Emotionally mature love does not beg for the smallest available portion of someone's attention and affection. It does not exhaust and destroy itself in the effort to prove its own worthiness to someone who is not yet ready to receive it. It does not chase endlessly while quietly sacrificing the dignity that makes love sustainable in the first place. Mature love understands patience without allowing patience to become self-abandonment. It creates genuine space for another person without disappearing emotionally from its own center. It extends real compassion without dissolving the boundaries that keep it whole and functional. And sometimes the greatest and most loving act available to you is not forcing a connection forward before it is ready, but allowing the other person the emotional space they need to confront themselves honestly and without the pressure of your presence filling every gap. Because genuine transformation cannot be managed or controlled from the outside by someone who loves a person more than that person currently loves themselves. A person changes only when their own soul has grown genuinely tired of repeating the same emotional cycles and paying the same internal costs over and over again. Perhaps this particular connection entered your life not only to offer you love in the conventional sense, but to awaken something in you on a psychological level that needed to be disturbed and brought to the surface. To teach you in a way that could not be taught theoretically the real difference between emotional attachment and genuine emotional alignment between two people. To show you how deeply and how consistently you crave emotional reciprocity from the people you choose to love. To force you to face honestly the ways in which you have ignored your own intuition in the past, out of fear of losing someone whose presence felt necessary to your sense of wholeness. Consider this carefully and honestly. Have there been moments throughout this experience when your intuition quietly and persistently whispered the truth long before your conscious mind was willing to accept and acknowledge it? Moments where you sensed the real nature of their feelings beneath the words they were offering you on the surface? Human beings are far more intuitive and perceptive than they typically allow themselves to recognize or credit. The subconscious mind is constantly and automatically reading emotional energy, interpreting body language, tracking emotional shifts, noting patterns in silence, registering eye contact and its absence, picking up on nervous tension that words are carefully constructed to conceal. Long before logic arrives at a conclusion, the soul frequently already holds the answer it has been quietly assembling from all of those subtle and unspoken signals. This is why certain people remain emotionally unforgettable long after shared time and shared space have ended, not because they were perfect or uncomplicated or easy to love, but because their presence in your life emotionally awakened something that had been lying dormant and waiting inside you. And awakening of that depth is rarely a comfortable or gentle process. Sometimes it arrives through longing that has no obvious resolution, sometimes through confusion that resists every attempt to organize it into something manageable, sometimes through the particular quality of emotional distance that forces a kind of inner reflection that comfort never would have demanded. Sometimes through missing someone so deeply and so persistently that you are finally compelled to confront the loneliness you had been carefully and successfully avoiding before they arrived and made you aware of it. Pain carries a strange and underappreciated psychological function in a person's life. It strips away the comfortable illusions that allow emotional avoidance to continue indefinitely. It brings emotional truth to the surface whether or not you feel prepared to face it. It reveals with uncomfortable precision where healing is still needed and where old wounds have been allowed to remain unaddressed beneath the surface of a functional daily life. This is why some relationships completely transform a person's inner world even when they never reach a state of external stability or resolution. They create the conditions for growth that comfort never would have produced. They generate the pressure that forces genuine self-awareness. They demand a level of emotional evolution that a person would never have chosen voluntarily if given the option of remaining comfortably unchanged. And perhaps the person you are thinking about is currently standing at the very edge of that kind of transformation themselves, even if nothing visible on the surface would suggest it. Perhaps they are slowly and reluctantly beginning to recognize that emotional avoidance no longer protects them the way it once reliably did. Perhaps your absence from their daily emotional world has created a space that forces them to sit with feelings they have spent considerable effort suppressing and managing. Perhaps they are beginning at some level to understand that real love and real connection cannot survive indefinitely inside silence and wounded pride. Because eventually every human being arrives at a moment in their life when the weight of loneliness becomes genuinely heavier and more unbearable than the risk of vulnerability. And when that moment arrives with enough force, people begin to change. Not instantly and not without difficulty and not in ways that follow any predictable pattern, but gradually and from the inside where it actually counts. They begin recognizing the walls they constructed around their emotional world and seeing those walls not as protection but as isolation they built themselves. They start noticing with new and uncomfortable clarity how consistently fear has been making their most significant decisions for them. They begin to see how many genuine opportunities for connection and closeness they sabotaged in the effort to protect themselves from a pain that they ultimately experienced anyway in the form of emptiness and disconnection. And for what may be the first time in their adult life, they begin to understand with real conviction that emotional safety cannot exist without the willingness to be emotionally open to another person. That realization, when it arrives with genuine depth, has the potential to change everything about how a person moves through their relationships going forward. But while they navigate their own awakening at whatever pace and through whatever process is available to them, you must continue navigating your own with equal care and intention. Do not allow the uncertainty of their timeline to quietly erode your sense of your own worth and your own value as a person. Do not permit another person's emotional confusion or unavailability to convince you that you are somehow inherently difficult to love or not worthy of the consistency you genuinely need. The way a person responds to genuine intimacy most often reflects the nature of their relationship with themselves far more accurately than it reflects anything about your value as a human being capable of love. Many people who are emotionally unavailable in their relationships are not withholding love because you have failed to demonstrate sufficient worthiness. They are withholding because they themselves are living inside a profound and often unexamined fear. Fear of genuinely needing another person and what that need exposes about their vulnerability. Fear of emotional dependency and the loss of control that accompanies it. Fear of rejection arriving precisely at the moment when they have allowed themselves to want something deeply. Fear of being seen too clearly and too honestly by someone whose opinion of them has come to matter more than they prepared for. And in a painful and ironic dynamic, the more deeply they love someone, the more vulnerable and therefore the more frightened they become by the depth of what they feel.